Could I see me right now? Is it possible, just to make sure there's nothing in my background? Oh, I guess I can't. I'll have to wait.
Let me see. I think if I stop sharing my screen, you might be able to see yourself better.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this evening at the final San Mateo County Juneteenth 2022 webinar. My name is Bray Hunter, and I'm a legislative aide for Supervisor Horsley. Before we begin this evening, I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping. First, this webinar will be recorded, and that recording, along with recordings of the previous 3 webinars, will be available on the county's Juneteenth webpage. Webinar attendees can interact with staff running the webinar through the chat function for technical questions. However, attendees will not be able to chat with other attendees. Attendees can use the question and answer feature, and panelists will answer those after the moderator questions. Live transcript is available through Zoom, and there will be a slide with additional resources shared at the end of the webinar. Also, we will have a survey available at the end of this series to gather feedback and ideas for next year's Juneteenth events. In recent years, the County Board of Supervisors has made commitments to advancing equity. One of the steps taken towards advancing equity at the county level was designating Juneteenth as an annual holiday. In June 2021, Supervisor Horsley and Supervisor Groom were appointed to an ad hoc Board of Supervisors committee for the purposes of reviewing and making recommendations on how the county would recognize Juneteenth. The actions recommended and taken this year include the raising of the Juneteenth flag at county properties and organizing a 4-part webinar series dedicated to increasing education and awareness about this important holiday and the barriers to freedom that Black people in San Mateo County continue to face. The county's Chief Equity Officer, Shireen Malakafzali, and the San Mateo branch of the NAACP provided invaluable input and assistance with the coordination of these events. The previous 3 webinars have focused on the history and impact of Juneteenth, housing obstacles faced by Black Americans, and the importance of education in the fight for Black liberation and freedom for all. Tonight, we focus on the power and creativity of Black leadership. Before I introduce our esteemed moderator, I'd like to give a brief overview of what the Juneteenth holiday commemorates. Many of us have been taught that slavery was abolished on January 1st, 1863, when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, this proclamation only directed the freeing of enslaved people within states in rebellion. Additionally, due to the slow advance of Union troops into the Confederacy, it took another 2 years before the last enslaved people in Texas heard of their proclaimed freedom. Those enslaved people in Texas learned of their freedom on June 19th, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger issued General Order No. 3. This date was then celebrated beginning the next year in 1866 and has spread throughout the country and world as a time dedicated to education, awareness, reflection, and remembrance. The event and holiday remind us that, in the words of civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, nobody's free until everybody's free. Tonight's moderator graced us with her wisdom at the first Juneteenth webinar, and we are so honored that she was able to join us again tonight. She is an award-winning journalist who has hosted television shows and produced syndicated stories to air nationally. In February of 2018, she was inducted into the Black Legends Hall of Fame in Silicon Valley in recognition for her contributions to the field of media. Without further ado, our moderator for this evening, Ms. Henrietta Burrows.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor for me to be here with our four panelists. As you just now heard, this is the fourth in a four-part series in the county's Juneteenth observation. And the past three webinars discuss housing, education, and local perspectives around Juneteenth. In our discussion today, we will discuss how to increase equity and inclusion through leadership in the Black community, through creativity, resilience, and we'll talk about the future. So I'd like for our panelists, since we're not just going to assume that we know what we're talking about when we talk about Black leadership, creativity, and resilience, I'd like for our panelists to talk about what do those three ideas mean to them. For example, when we talk about Black leadership, are we talking about Black people leading others in the Black community? Or are we talking about Black people who are leaders in general? So I'd like to start with the question, what do those three ideas, those three words mean to each of you? Black leadership, creativity, and resilience.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start. I'm Reverend Lori Owens from the San Mateo NAACP. When I think about leadership, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, particularly as it relates to African Americans and our situation here in the United States, I believe that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is a perfect example of what a leader does and who a leader is. Although he spoke obviously to the Black community coming out of the Black church, he did not limit his leadership to just Black people. He called this entire nation to live out its creed. So he didn't just talk to us. And that's what I believe we still need and we have to aspire to. It's not just a matter of speaking to one group of people, to an oppressed group of people, but to all people in this nation. Regarding creativity, I believe it calls for us to think out of the box. Too often we go with old methodologies, old ideas, and this is the 21st century, and sometimes we have to have new solutions to age-old problems. So one of the I think killers of coming to a place of solution is this is the way we've always done it. So we need to throw that out the window and think about new ways to get to solving problems that exist in this country. Resilience, and I just heard a definition of resilience, and I have to agree with that. That I personally, although I feel that the fact that I'm an African American and any of us who are African American, clearly when you look at our history, we're resilient because we're still here. But I have to admit, I'm tired of being resilient. I have to admit that, I don't want to be looked at as somebody that, the capacity to suffer. As a human being, I'm thinking that maybe we need to look at a different way of looking at Black people like, wow, that's resilient people. We need to figure out, as what we talked about just a little bit ago, why do we need to continue to be resilient? Let's get rid of the reason for that, so that we're not called upon any more than anyone else to be resilient people. So I'll stop with that.
Yes, Reverend Owens, thank you so much for starting us off. Now, I need to say that Reverend Lori Owens is the president of the San Mateo branch of the NAACP. Also speaking will be Pastor Marlon Bussey, who's the pastor of the St. James AME Church in San Mateo. We have with us Michael Smith, who is a city council member in Redwood City, And we also have Kalima Salahuddin, who's on the Jefferson Union High School Board of Trustees. So Pastor Bussey, would you like to share your ideas?
Sure. And I just, because the AMEs are our sister church, I want to say AME Zion. I'm a pastor in an AME Zion church. So I just need to say that. But thank you for inviting me. I have to agree with everything my sister Reverend Lori said. I think I want to start with creativity. She said you have to think outside the box, and I have two millennials in my life, my daughters who are 41 and 39, and they help me tremendously in thinking about issues through their lens instead of mine. Generationally, we do have a tendency to kind of get stuck in what works for us. But what works for us does not work for the millennial generation. It just doesn't. And so I think we do have to be very creative and become much more interactive and engaged in ways that that really represent their perspective. So I think that that's one of the things it's important. I mean, we are all, baby boomers. And so we've got generations behind us that are going to pick up what we leave them. And it's important for us to leave them a roadmap that allows them to think out of the box. And so I would agree with Reverend Lori on that. I think when I think of leadership, I don't think about leadership to a particular group. I think that Black leadership is important. I think it's important for us to have those spaces where we are leading. As a pastor, I invite anybody and everybody to the church to worship with us. But they need to know when they come, they're going to get a Black worship experience, a historically African-American worship experience. And I used to be a little bit apologetic about that, and I'm not anymore, because people come and they enjoy it, and they're uplifted in a way that a lot of times they may not be in the church setting of other cultures. So I think that there's a really important place for Black leadership, and for us to really just be who we are, unapologetically, and just allow those who want to partake, whether that's from a pulpit, whether that's from a position of directing an organization, or whatever it is, whatever position we hold. I think that it's incumbent on us to step up and really just say, I belong at this table, whatever table it is, and take our place there, because I think that we've earned it. I think that we have more than earned it. And then with regard to resilience, again, I kind of feel like Reverend Lori does, that it's sometimes, and maybe a lot of the time, on Black people to be the ones that make everyone else feel a little bit better. It's on us to carry the burden, and to allow other people to release the burden of our history and of everything that we've been through. And while I'm really proud of the resilience of Black folk, because no matter what has happened, we are still here. I do think that it's time for us to show our humanity, and to realize that when we're cut, we bleed just like everybody else. When we're hurt, we cry just like everybody else. And that's not a weakness. It's just being human. So I'm going to stop there and let somebody else have a chance.
Should I call on someone? Or Kalima, I see you smiling.
Sure. So just to piggyback on what the panelists said thus far, I agree with everything. In speaking about leadership and really advocating for my community, knowing that I have to lead, being a voice of the underrepresented, but speaking in a way that everyone understands the importance of it. Because so many issues that are being raised by me for our community, the solution makers are not part of the community. So how do I express our needs in a way so they understand that our survival and the health of our communities is essential to the health of theirs? Really leaning into creativity, because again, to piggyback on what was previously said, when people talk about, how it's always been done, how it's always been done is what's got us here in the first place. Nothing happens by accident. These systems of oppression are working exactly how they were intended. And we have to be creative to disrupt the system. We also have to be creative when thinking about the COVID response and what happened during COVID. We couldn't wait for our county leadership, federal leadership to get it together in order to support our community who were catching COVID and dying, not being able to get access to testing, not getting communicated to in the proper way on why it was essential to get, vaccinated and boosted. So we had to get creative on our own and finding out ways to gather our resources. I know that Pastor Bussey and Reverend Owens played huge roles in the county and, had to really, none of us were, this work and the amount of work that we have to do that was not part of the job description. I'm a school board member and we were doing COVID testing. That is not part of the job description. But you really have to get creative because we don't have time to wait for other people to get it together in order to serve our community. And then the resilience piece of this, one of the greatest Black women leaders was my mom. And she was a single mother and she had 5 kids. And all of her kids are leaders in the community. And she is one of the most resilient women I've ever met in my life. And I have seen her struggle in ways that she shouldn't have had to struggle. Even as a single mother, watching how people talk down to her because of her color, because seeing her children and the skin tone of her kids, because my mother is lighter skinned, and then seeing how all of a sudden the discussion shifted when they saw her darker skinned children, and her resilience and patience and strength, and wanting to disrupt that so my kids don't have to be resilient in the same way. Like, I admire those things in my mom. I'm so proud that she was able to do those things for me, but I don't want to have to pass that on to my kids and have to have them watch them go through the same struggles that my mother and my grandmother went through. So I like that we are acknowledged for our resilience, but I also would like for people to step up when they talk about the resilience of the Black community, in the same breath, talk about how do we break those patterns so you don't have to continue to be resilient in the ways that we've had to be resilient for generations.
Thank you. Michael, that leaves you. Michael Smith.
Thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you this evening to discuss these really interesting and, of course, really complicated topics. And that's kind of immediately the word that comes to mind. And thinking about these particular words, they're complicated.
Is there any way to turn your sound up higher?
I'll try my best. Is that better?
A little.
It's a little better. If I lean in, does that help?
Well, for the others, is the sound a little low to you? Well, continue, Michael.
I'll try to speak up for sure. Apologies about the sound. And just to repeat a little bit of what I was mentioning, definitely complicated but important concepts for us to be dealing with. So I'd love to kind of chime in on my thoughts on leadership, creativity, and resilience. When I think about Black leadership, I think first and foremost about the moral and ethical leadership that the Black community has taken in this country. The Black community in this country is truly responsible for the progressive, inclusive, and equitable stances that we're seeing play out today across the world, really. We were the community that really began the conversation around what it looks like to build a community that is truly grounded in concepts of equality, these like notions of kind of Western liberalism, of making sure that all folks have an equal opportunity to live out their best lives as much as possible. And this is kind of no more founded on kind of the concepts that were brought to us by our Black leaders. Leaders like Martin Luther King, of course, like Malcolm X, like James Baldwin, like Shirley Chisholm, Harriet Tubman. These are leaders who really were ahead of their times in terms of setting the moral map, the path for our nation and our world to be walking down. I don't think that our community gets enough credit for that. And it is immutable. It is a fact that communities, that nations cannot deny that the Black American community has truly had an indelible mark on the world in terms of driving concepts of morality, in terms of race, in terms of equality, in terms of access, for sure. In terms of creativity, the first few things that come to mind are that we have a uniqueness in terms of how we approach creativity. We are constantly twisting and innovating and really just inventing new forms of expression every day. From our language to our music to our visual arts, we bring a true level of uniqueness, and is uniqueness that comes to form, again, the foundation of what American creativity is known for, right? So when we think about what American music is, it is Black music. When we think about American vernacular, most of it is founded in the development of Black language. I mean, you think about some of the words that are just commonly used in parlance today, they have foundations in our Black communities. And so that uniqueness is really, I think, the kind of undergirding of what I think Black creativity is all about. And what I think is even more interesting about that is the uniqueness is developed on the margins of society. We have, for so long been relegated to the margins of political and economic life in this country. And, even with that reality, we've been able to create such a robust, beautiful set of cultural expressions, again, from our music to our food to our language. That is really directly related to resilience, quite frankly. I completely agree with the other panelists that it is at times a burden to have the notions of resilience put on us, especially as a kind of foundational element of our existence within this cultural experience that we're having. But I do find joy and value and just a lot of hope in the resilience that we as a community bring. It is, when I think about what African American resilience is, it's about finding a ray of light amidst a sea of darkness, frankly, really kind of understanding that there is a long way to go, but that there is hope ultimately in the struggle, and that we should not give up despite what seems like insurmountable obstacles. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like being a Frederick Douglass or a Harriet Tubman and thinking about just the small ways that they were trying to push the needle forward for freedom for our community. And we continue to do that on a day-to-day basis. I also think resilience is about finding joy and peace and in our everyday experiences, even amidst the struggles that we experience. And again, that's what I kind of want to leave us on, is that I, hope, I pray that all of you who are watching this, who are part of this conversation, have joy amidst all of the challenges that we are dealing with, because we should not have joy taken from us. We should own it. We should give it to others, and we should really revel in it. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you all for sharing. I need to get back to you with a question in terms of resilience. And I'd like to know, why do you see it, several of you, as burdensome? Because I would think, simply as an individual, just to survive in life, one has to be resilient. And so when you talk to your children or millennials or anybody, you hope that they will be resilient when they get knocked down, when they come up to trials and tribulations and challenges, that they will find the wherewithal within themselves to continue on. So why do some of you consider it burdensome? And I think Reverend Owens, you started out by saying it's burdensome sometimes.
Yes,
Why?
let me give you a story. My grandson, who was 12 at the time, he's 20 years old now. He finally got permission to take the bus to go to school. He wanted to be more independent. So he took the bus, and almost immediately, where we live, when he got off the bus, it was about a mile walk from the bus stop to our house, live in a nice area. He was followed. He was asked, "Where do you live?" He was told, and this is a child that lived in my house since he was 2 years old. And he was told, "You don't belong here. I don't believe you live here. Show me where you live." Now, my grandson, we took care of that situation with the neighborhood. I made sure that my neighbors understood that, and this was 3 times that this happened to him, where he's being followed at 3 in the afternoon, 3:30 or whatever, by vigilantes in his neighborhood, AKA Trayvon Martin, because he's very dark skinned. He didn't look like he lived here. So I took care of that situation. But you talk about children needing to be resilient, and all children have trials and tribulations and go through things. But I'll be honest, I was tired, and I'm still tired, of telling my young Black grandsons that this is going to happen to you. I'm tired of saying to my grandsons, "Oh, we're going to teach you how to drive. You're going to get your driver's license. This is what you do here's your AAA card. But also, this is what you do when the police, not if, but when the police pull you over." The same grandson, when he was at Arizona State, we finally let him take his car when he turned 18. He was 17 when he entered college. He took his car, and sure enough, we told him this is going to happen. Within 1 week, he was pulled over. And he had to, he got out of it. He's very well spoken. He's resilient. He knew what to do. He knew how to do it. He's a resilient kid. But the bottom line is that he then was kind of a little bit of a celebrity with his white roommates and friends, because they'd never been pulled over before. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about I'm tired of resilience. I hear exactly what Kalima is saying about not wanting our children to have to be more resilient than other children, not having us have to be more resilient in our workplace, in where we live, and all the things we do.
Well,
I'm tired of being resilient.
I can understand that. I think it's a matter of definition. I necessarily don't see that as resilience. I see that as dealing with the situations that you're dealing with and how best to deal with them.
That's our difference in definition. To me, resilience means bouncing back and taking what you have been given in stride, if you will, and keeping on, moving on. And that's what my grandchildren have done.
Yes.
But they shouldn't have to be more resilient than other children their age, or other young people their age.
I would like to invite comments if the rest of you have any comments in terms of that. And I know Pastor Bussey, you kind of commented yourself on resilience.
Yes.
I think we need to be resilient regardless of the circumstances.
We do need to be resilient, but it's the degree. It's the degree of resilience that we're speaking of, I believe. When you, like Reverend Lori said, when I have girls, when I have to tell my daughters, if you get stopped by the police, please just do what you need to do to get home, and we'll deal with it later. There are families that don't have to ever have that kind of conversation with their children. You know, when you have a child who happens to be the only African-American staff member in a staff of 200 people, they learn resilience because they become the voice of all of Black America when a question is asked. And no matter what they're feeling, the things that the stressors, really the generational trauma that we carry with us every single day is foreign to people who are not in our skin. And so it creates a heightened sense of resiliency, because you have to be better. You have to be better than the rest. You have to be stronger than the rest. You can never let people see you sweat. You know, you have to suck it up and deal with it. You have to overlook, you know, comments and behaviors that are just off color and wrong. It's all that kind of stuff. And you carry that inside of you. So yes, we're resilient, but the resilience can be exhausting.
Well, I can see the problem that you have with it if you define resilience as accepting. And that's not how I define it. So for me, can one be tired of being resilient? Well, yes, at times, because we get tired, period. But you pick yourself up and you go back out there. But that doesn't mean you're accepting. So I don't accept. For me, the two are not equivalent.
Okay. I'm gonna let somebody else, because I don't want to hog. I don't want to hog the time.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to stay on this point for much longer, but I will say, in agreeing with Reverend Owens and Pastor Bussey, that it's hard to watch my children struggle more than other children to reach the same goal, simply because of the color of their skin. You know, the first time that my son was threatened to have the police called on him, he was in 6th grade. 6th grade. And I had to talk to his teacher and let her know that it is inappropriate for her to threaten my son with police. He's autistic. He was acting out in a way that every autistic child does, but he was seen as a threat. And so threatening in a 6th grade body that she felt it was necessary to call the police. You know, that none of my children drive. They all take Ubers because they've seen me get pulled over enough to where they were like, we won't even deal with that. We're okay. We'll just take an Uber. So none of them drive. To my son, again, being autistic, I had to become a school board member in order to ensure that he got through the system okay. And I know that was the right decision, because out of the 6 Black males that were the same age in his class with autism, he's the only one that graduated from high school with a diploma. He's the only one. So, and his struggle, even having a mother who, when he acted out and a counselor didn't know who I was in the system, called me and said, first thing out of his mouth was, well, I see you're a single mother. I know that if I was white or any other race, that would have not been the first thing out of his mouth in talking to me about my child. As soon as they found out who I was, it was fine. But I know that if I had been a Black mother, not a school board mother, not a school board member, my son probably would have been suspended. He probably would have been put out of the school. So many other things would have happened. So, you know, I was resilient enough to strive forward, to become that board member, to do what I had to do to make sure my children got through school and the educational system with as minimal amount of damage as possible. You know, and I'm part of the education system, and I know that we do damage sometimes. But I shouldn't have had to do that. And that's where the exhaustion with the resiliency comes in. I shouldn't have had to do all that to get my kids through school undamaged. And I'm proud of what I accomplished, and I'm proud of what I did as a school board member, and I'm proud of my children. But I also, if I had to go back and not have to do, then not to have that burden, I would choose to not have to do it.
Well, I so much appreciate the sharing that you've done, Reverend Owens and Pastor Bussey and Kalima, just in giving us additional insight into what resilience means in terms of its ramifications and how it affects us all. Now, we've talked about leadership, creativity, and of course, more time with resilience. Are there other attributes or qualities that you think are important in the discussion that we're having?
If I were to pick another quality, and I'm not sure that everybody would agree it's a quality in the same way, but to me, an unwavering, unapologetic, laser-focused commitment to dedication to truth. Because when I look at what's happening in our nation today, when I look at what's happening with Black people today, both within our own community, however that is defined, and in the larger American community, one of the things that we are seeing that is eroding, which I do believe is hurting our cause, is truth, a commitment to truth. The first truth being that there is a problem. The first truth being that there is systematic racism through all of our systems. The first truth being that the playing field is not level. And until we admit that there is a problem in this nation, we will not solve it. So I think that one of the things that we have to be focused on as Blacks, as leaders, well, not just as Blacks, as people of good conscience, as Americans committed to what the Declaration of Independence says, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And until we get to holding these truths, get that to the truth, and if we don't get this nation and our own folks back to a place where we understand or even recognize truth, then we're going to continue to have serious problems in the nation and in the community.
Well, we seem to have that now when you consider the idea that during the past administration, we had something called alternative facts. And truth is very, very important, but how do you get people to accept the facts as truth? Since people seem to believe whatever it is they want to believe. Now, this isn't just for Reverend Owens, so please, if the others of you have some ideas, please share them.
I think as a retired educator, one of the things that we need to do is we need to start teaching the truth in school. I mean, I went to school, my entire education was done in the Bay Area, and all the way through graduate work. And I had a real problem with Juneteenth because I didn't understand what Juneteenth was. My parents, one from Georgia and one from Louisiana, their families didn't celebrate Juneteenth. So I heard about Juneteenth maybe 20 years ago, I don't know. And when I did hear about it, I had more anger about Juneteenth because I'm like, I can't believe they made those people wait for almost 3 years before they, before they allowed them to also be free. And so but that was because of what I had been taught, or mistaught, actually. So I think one of the things that really needs to happen is we need to start telling the truth to children in the textbooks, because the textbooks are written in a way that the dominant culture is portrayed favorably. And I think that to Michael's point earlier, Black people helped build and actually built this country, and we're not portrayed that way. So I think that if you begin by teaching the right history of this country, you could do much to break down the stereotypes, the systemic racism that exists, the institutionalized racism that exists. A lot could be done to remedy that if the truth was taught beginning in schools.
The challenge right now is, how do you get school boards to accept books in their school systems that teach the truth? Because right now, many of them want to exclude those textbooks that are not taught or that do not reflect the traditional things that we've been taught in the school in the past. So truth is very important, but how do you then get more and more people, even on the educational level, to accept the truth is more than what we've been taught previously?
It goes back to the leadership question, because even if you're the only African-American staff member, you step up and you begin to explain and to show by example why you shouldn't teach a textbook, for instance, that has the N-word all the way through it. What's wrong with that? All the reasons that that is wrong, and how you're not going to change the culture of the school that you're in unless you get rid of books that are degrading to any particular culture. So it takes one person that's courageous enough to step up as a leader and say, this isn't right. I'm a part of this system, and what we're doing here isn't right for kids. And I think that if people will do that, things will change. Books can be opted out, and they're opted out every single day. But some
Halima,
books have been in force forever because nobody's challenged them.
sure. Now, Kalima, you're on the Jefferson Union High School Board of Trustees.
Yes.
Is this an issue that you faced?
Yes, I mean, this is extremely important, and one of the reasons why I became a school board member. I had, again, my mom is fantastic, and I went to school, and then I came home and went to school, and she made sure that we learned our history. She taught us our history. My mom's side of the family is from Texas, from Kilgore, Texas, and they were part of the Juneteenth slaves. My grandmother was the first generation of her family to leave the farm, the plantation where our family were slaves. Like, my grandmother picked cotton. And then migrated to San Francisco. So, I was able to learn my history at a really early age, and I'm really grateful for my mother for ensuring that. But I want to make sure that everyone needs to learn our history. We are here today in this situation with the administration and a lot of the rollbacks from the Supreme Court because we have not resolved slavery and racism and teaching real history and what really happened in America. So, our school district and our feeder district, Jefferson Elementary, are really embracing, and I'm really proud of both of our boards, a history and teaching ethnic studies in a way that's organic, that is inclusive of our community. It's not just telling the history of Black people, but telling the history of Black people in the Bay Area. There's a whole lot of things that happened here that many people are unaware of, and that are the part that we played in the civil rights movement here in the Bay Area. And building that curriculum ourselves. Again, that creativity and not being able to wait for the textbooks to catch up. So we'll develop the curriculum ourselves. We have amazing teachers that are building that curriculum out, and we hope to roll it out next year. And really make sure that, it's not enough to just teach one class. We're not gonna, one of my guiding lights is, the system is what got us here. So can we use that same system to get us out of this place? And that's the essential question. And you can't disrupt that system with one class in 1 year. It has to be spread throughout the entire curriculum and show up in every single place: math, science, English. And so I'm so happy that our superintendent and our district office has really embraced that. And I'm hoping that we move forward and to be a model for other districts in San Mateo County.
Michael, I don't want to leave you out of this discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I actually wanted to circle back to your original question just about words or ideas that I think encapsulate the spirit of the community. And I have two words that are really kind of going back and forth in my mind. The first one is unity. Um, I think there's an interesting kind of conversation that's kind of ongoing for the last few decades that suggests that African Americans are not a unified community, and I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think that the African American community is, if not the most united minority community in the country. Certainly one of the top, let's say, two or three in the country. When I think about the buying patterns of the Black community, when I think about the voting patterns of the Black community, when I think about the consumption of art and media, it is clear that the Black community has a very specific point of view. And I think that that is extremely powerful. I think that the Black community has the ability to harness its collectivity to make significant impact on this country. I mean, let's reference the last two presidential elections. The last two presidential elections were hinged on the Black vote. And that is not lost on really anyone in the political establishment, of course, but really in any kind of corridor of power within the country. And we should really recognize that and really celebrate that, frankly. I think the one thing that I would caution our community to watch out for is that sometimes we can be used in ways that are not productive or valuable for our community. Empty promises can be made, and we will sometimes kind of step in the fray to bring change electorally, economically, and so on and so forth, but we will not get return. And we really need to be aware of that and be focused on not having that happen in the future. I want to say that that is true on a national level, but it's also true on a local level. I would encourage everyone to really watch our local political institutions. The local San Mateo Democratic Party. I would suggest us looking at other institutions like city councils, school boards that use and will utilize the buying power, the voting power of the Black community and issues surrounding the Black community for political mileage, but nothing is given in return. And I think that that is a major problem. It's something that I've talked about with colleagues and with folks in the community, and I hope that we keep an eye out for. Second, and I'll keep it quick, is faith. It's not lost on me that we have two clergy people on the call today. That is extremely unusual. Many institutions, organizations really relegate their faith communities to the periphery. And that is absolutely not the case for the Black community. We put our faith leaders front and center. They often are the explicit voices during times of hardship and times of celebration as well. So that is something that I think is extremely valuable and something that I think defines the Black community.
Well, you circled back to a previous conversation, and I'd like to just kind of circle back to something that you just now said in terms of harnessing our power and realizing that we don't always get the return that we're seeking. And I would suggest maybe because for all the goals that we put forward, they're met by opposition, because there are those who want to hold on to the status quo, and we're going to get every obstacle to keep us where we are from achieving the goals. So as we look at the need for truth, what we consider resilience and creativity and leadership. What do we do in terms of keeping the goals that we have moving forward in spite of the obstacles?
I'll jump in quickly, and then I would love to hear what the other panelists have to say. Number one, I'd like to just start off by saying that's an extremely complicated question. But I think that the way that we start out by answering that question is really getting clear as a unified community, which again, I believe that we are, on what those goals are and being steadfast in keeping those goals top of mind. So I'm saying that because I think about the infrastructure bill that was just passed by President Biden. Now, the infrastructure bill was a win. It was progress, but I will say that the level of value that the African American community will experience as a result of that legislation, which is his landmark legislation at this point, is minimal. You know, when I think about other types of legislation that could have been passed or other actions that could have been taken. So for example, student loan forgiveness, right? I mean, would have had major ripple effects on the Black community. And that was not considered in any real way by the Biden administration, who, by the way, would not have been in office if it were not for the Black community. And so this is kind of exactly the example that I was kind of thinking about when I was just, you know, giving that thought, sharing that thought, is that we clearly created political value for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but we have not seen anything in return. And I think part of that goes to the fact that once they were put into office, we were not demanding things on day one. We were not. I did not hear it. And that I think is the real problem here. And now we're finally getting to a place where we're saying, oh, let's rally around, you know, student loan forgiveness. But it's too late. That should have been happening on day one. And unfortunately, I think, again, clarity of goal for, you know, as a first step is a real key to getting that value.
Other comments, other thoughts? We've heard truth, we've heard unity, we've heard faith. What other ideas would you throw in the hopper, and your comments on what Michael just said?
I would agree. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kalina.
Oh, I was just going to quickly say collaboration, uniting our voices. I co-founded an organization called the Reach Coalition to organize with other community leaders in San Mateo County of color. And there's more power when there's more than one of us in a room, because usually, especially in San Mateo County, they invite one of us into a room and we're there and surrounded by a bunch of people that don't look like us and don't have the same lived experience, and then expecting to hold ground for the entire community, and that's hard. So making sure that we are united in voice and there's more than one of us in the room and we have a shared message that we're saying everywhere we go. Even if we're the only person, we're all saying the same thing. So taking what Michael said and then working with other people to push those goals through, I think is extremely important.
So when you talk about working with other people, you mean collaborating with other groups, with other ethnic groups, with other...
Yes, with other leaders of color. Because a lot of, you know, they really try to divide us a lot. There's a lot of talk of what happens when white people are no longer the majority, but there's a lot of the minority groups, we don't work together. They refer to us as a collective body, but we're all really working individually in our own communities, but there's not a lot of collaboration and working together. And we have a lot of the same interests and the same goals. We have a lot of the same issues. So how do we work collaboratively to change the system? Because again, looking at the civil rights movement and other successful movements before us, it wasn't just one group.
Well, you know, you talked about the attempts to divide us, but as much as we'd like to collaborate, one has to be mindful of the fact that the attempts that are put forward to keep us divided.
Yep, I'm always mindful of those attempts. It's nothing has been harder than to run a group or a collective of people who may have divergent interests, but really, as Michael was saying earlier, keeping our eyes on that shared goal and not straying from the shared goal. So no matter how people come at us, we know that if we break up, we can't reach or achieve the goals that we know we need to meet in order to keep our community safe and healthy.
Reverend Owens, you were going to
Oh,
say
I'd love
something.
to just jump in really quick. I mean, I think this point on kind of dividing the community is so interesting because it will not work. If you look at the attempts that certain political factions within the United States have tried to do over the past few decades, at every attempt to break up the coalition that is the Black community, it has failed. Whether it be on issues around faith and morality, in association with kind of the evangelical right, we see that the Black community remains united. When we talk about the advancement of certain segments of the Black community economically, right, we have a really strong Black middle class in certain places. It still has not divided the Black community. So attempts to divide the Black community may continue, but I think we're now starting to see across the board people, organizations and factions that wish to divide our community will fail.
Well, Michael, not just dividing the Black community, but interfering with the Black community's collaboration with other racial and ethnic groups.
Hmm.
So, Reverend Owens, you were going to say something when Kalima started talking. So, do you still want to share the point you had in mind?
No, I think it's been said already, so we can move on from.
Oh, okay. Well, we have truth, we have unity, we have faith, we have collaboration. Are there other qualities that you would add to our discussion in terms of moving Black Americans forward in San Mateo County?
I would say, and maybe this is an offshoot of the resilience piece that I bristled at a little bit, but a deep and abiding pride in who we are. Even though, when we look at ourselves and we look at our history and we look at where we've come from, we have everything from anger and angst and a lot of emotion about that. The fact is that we come from people that have taken, for all intents and purposes, lemons and made lemonade in this country. I mean, you look at Black cuisine, and when you really, Southern, soul food, for example, and when you really look at where it came from the slave masters giving Black folks the worst of the meats, the worst of the produce, and what do we have? May not be the healthiest, but it's some of the most delicious, cuisine that you can think of. The music, like Michael was saying earlier, I mean, we really have created something from nothing. And one of the things that I, am proud of, I may not have grown up with all of the luxuries of some of my Caucasian friends, but I'm proud of the fact that I've achieved as much, if not more, in the secular world as many of them, even though my parents did not have people they could introduce me to. They couldn't call up, somebody and say, hey, give her a job. So I'm proud of who we are. I'm proud of where we came from. And I think that continuing to pass that pride down to our children and our children's children. I think that some of the problems we have with some of our young people is that they may not see who we really are and what we have achieved. And by embracing that, I think that that is a quality that will continue to capitulate us into the future.
Well, when you talk about our children or grandchildren not seeing who we are, that reminds me of the images that we are presented all the time through the media. Now we're seeing ourselves more and more, people who look like us. So I just want to point out that there are reasons why we need to have more images, more people that our children can look at and see themselves. So we've talked about truth and unity and faith and collaboration and pride. Are there other qualities and attributes?
I want to add a healthy entitlement. And what I mean by that is that when I was growing up, my father used to say to his children, you have to be twice as good to get an equal chance. And we grew up with that. But what that did is it made us kick doors open. It made us educate ourselves as well as we could and as much as we could, so that there wouldn't be any real reason, any accurate reason for someone to close a door in our face. They would have to come hard to prove that we were not qualified for what we were going for. And so it gave us entitlements normally used in a negative connotation. But I think that as Black people, we need to have a healthy entitlement. And that means that we do have to do our part. We do have to get ourselves educated for what we want to do. We do have to get the experience that we need. And then we need to demand, because we deserve to be there.
Is that part of claiming our right to
Absolutely.
Be there?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there other attributes? You're smiling, Kalima. Is there? You're smiling.
That one really resonated with me, especially as a mom and dealing in my kids and seeing the difference in their entitlement and how they feel that they belong in certain spaces. And, I have one of my daughters who I had to check myself in sometimes telling her to maybe be humble. And then I said, no, let her shine, don't block her sun, don't block her light. Be out of fear that she'll overstep or be too much or someone will try to cut her down. This is what we need and what I need to see out of all of my children in order to push forward through this world, to walk into the room knowing that you belong there and daring anybody to tell her that she doesn't belong there. And seeing that in her kind of lit a fire in me to be more courageous when I walk into rooms, to be more courageous, to speak up. I was like, I'm gonna come in here and be a Maratella for a little while. That's my daughter's name. And so that's why I smiled. I mean, it just really resonated with me because I had to relearn that lesson or learn that lesson from my child.
Well, some would say we've been humble far too long, right? We've been made to show humility, to be humble. So there's that healthy entitlement and that courage. Are there others?
I don't have anything to add to that, but I was just thinking as I was hearing our previous two panelists talk about that I've been called arrogant a number of times, angry Black woman, arrogant woman. And, really for a while, especially as a Christian minister, being called arrogant didn't sound so good. But in the context in which it was, each of those times I was called arrogant, actually was a compliment, because we should walk into a room like we own it. And that was what was being alluded to. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that the next time I'm called arrogant, I'll be saying thank you very much. I appreciate
Well,
it.
I'm going to put a measure of arrogance. Huh? Well, we've talked about leadership, creativity, resilience, truth, unity, faith, collaboration, pride, a healthy entitlement, courage, a measure of arrogance. How do we tie this all into Juneteenth? Juneteenth and our ability as a race to move forward.
I can jump in. Oh, please.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, so when I think about Juneteenth, really the word that comes to mind and the feeling that comes to mind is liberation. And the liberation, the space, the freedom to decide for yourself who you will be, what you will provide to the world, and what your legacy will be within the arc of history. And so for me, when I think about all those qualities, I just want to like wrap all of those things around me. I want to cloak myself in all of those beautiful, amazing concepts and fully own them and walk into the future in a way that that fully represents who I am, what my community is, who my children will be, and what future generations of our community will be as well.
Well, you mentioned faith being important and having two ministers on this panel. One of your parents was a minister, right? So
yeah, that's right. I don't know how, I know we were on a panel before. I don't know how you remember that, but yes, that's correct. Yes, my dad was a minister, and I think that's kind of where my unshakable belief and hope and frankly faith in our community and in the future comes from, and that's kind of what how I travel through the world.
yes, and how for the rest of you on the panel in terms of traveling through the world, how do we take what we're observing in terms of Juneteenth and travel into the future from where we are now?
Well, I would like to say that when I think about Juneteenth and when I learned about Juneteenth, there was the reality of what happened on January 1st of 1863, when Abraham Lincoln declared that slaves would be free in the rebellious states. But there was the reality of that. But until the truth migrated all the way to Galveston, Texas, the slaves there and the slave owners did not know that. So that, to me, Juneteenth really underscores the need for truth to be declared to all spaces, to all people, about what we as Black people are experiencing and what we as a nation are experiencing. The second thing I want to talk about with regards to Juneteenth is that if you read about what General Granger said, he basically read General Order 3, basically saying you're free, but then he said, stay here, stay put. And what that means to me, that goes a little bit into what Michael was saying in terms of there were some that did exactly that. There were some enslaved people that did that because they didn't know anything else to do. There were others that left. They left. It was, we talk about the scatter. They left because they wanted to make their own determination about where they were going. They wanted to find their families. And so that is who we and how we need to ground ourselves, that we are going to be committed to the truth unapologetically, no matter who is uncomfortable with it or comfortable with it. We dedicate ourselves to telling the truth about us as people and about this nation. And then secondly, we take responsibility, we take ownership for our own determination. You know, to some degree, yes, we can ask the politicians, and we can give them the vote and whole 9 yards, and expect them to do certain things. But then there are other things we do for ourselves. We create our own. Let's create our own Black Wall Street again. You know, yeah, it got burned down. That's where, hey, resilience come in. Go in and create for ourselves, create our own destiny. Because if we depend on anyone else to do that, we will continue to be waiting for a long time. So do like those slaves that decided, hey, we're free. We just found out about it, but we're going to do something with that, and we're going to move forward. Don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to move forward into the unknown and create our own destiny.
Those are very inspirational words, Reverend Owens. Now, I just want to say, I do think many slave owners of that period knew that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. They weren't in ignorance. So we're dealing today with people who are providing the backlash, who are not ignorant in terms of the goals that we have that they feel threatened by. Other ideas in terms of how we can take what we've been talking about, those qualities of truth and unity and faith and collaboration and pride and a healthy entitlement, courage, a measure of arrogance, combined with leadership, creativity, and resilience to move into the future with Juneteenth.
I think that all of those qualities were modeled for us by many people, but since we're talking about Juneteenth, they were modeled by Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, and how she her thing that she believed God called her to do in this life was to push and push and work until Juneteenth became a national holiday. And I'm so glad that she was able to see it come to fruition. I think everyone has been given a task. Everybody's been given a task. We've all been given a roadmap, something that God or the divine or whoever you want to call him, I call him God, wants us to accomplish. And we need to walk that path and do all that we can. Too often we think that one person won't make a difference. Opal Lee teaches us that one person will make a difference. You know, Harriet Tubman taught us that one person will make a difference. Martin Luther King taught us that one person can make a difference. If we find our passion and we live out our passion, it will make a difference. I mean, Kalima is in the North County doing the same thing I'm doing in San Mateo, and we're pushing and we're using partners that are also people of color to push and to take care of what we can't wait for government to do. And so we just have to find those things that we're passionate about and then push and make them happen, believing that we can make a difference.
So you're saying we can be that one person.
Absolutely.
Who can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of time, is there something that we have not discussed that you feel very passionate about that you would like to share?
Well, I know there's a question in the Q&A.
What is it?
There's two questions. One is, when viewing Black leadership with a progressive lens, which is required from those who claim to stand in solidarity beyond Juneteenth, beyond Black History Month, beyond a Black JPEG square. I can tackle
What
that.
is required from those who claim to stand in solidarity beyond Juneteenth? Well, I guess that's what do Black leaders need to do now?
I think what we need
going beyond Juneteenth and Black History Month.
Right, and I think beyond our leadership, I mean, I think the flag and the resolutions are not the end, that is the start. And so I think that's where I get frustrated in the county, is that they'll pass a resolution or they'll fly the Juneteenth flag, and then they think that's the end of what they need to do or their responsibility. when really that's just the acknowledgement. Some actual work needs to be done. Budgets are a reflection of values. Things need to be reflected in the budget. I don't need a county that passes a resolution that says Black Lives Matter and in the same meeting spends $1 million more on tasers when we had a Black man tased to death on the streets of this very county. So that is essentially telling me that Black lives don't matter enough for you to not spend $1 million more when in the same county, we couldn't get testing done. We couldn't get vaccinations done. It took a lot of voices to get that same effort and that same money diverted to assisting that same community. When I, as a school board member in a school district that serves predominantly students of color, and again, when we talk about large populations of color, we're talking about lower incomes. So then because school districts are funded by the income of the people who live in the community, we're a lower funded school district. And in the middle of Silicon Valley, huge sections of our community don't have Wi-Fi in one of the richest places in the world. So we all know what needs to be done because it has been said and told to our leaders repeatedly by a lot of people in this Zoom and many more others outside of this. What I need is action, and I need dollars behind the action. So, it's time to get moving and get serious.
I'd love to piggyback on that. I completely agree with what Kaleema has said. I also think that what we need to expect from ally leadership is a speaking of truth. And we talked about truth already, but the reality is that truth is not being discussed. It's interesting. I just came from a city council meeting last night where we were discussing displacement. And one of the things in terms of housing and displacement that is not talked about in San Mateo County is that the Black community has been ravaged by displacement in San Mateo County, and no one talks about it. I moved to San Mateo County almost 8 years ago. I moved into a community where there was an AME church. I believe there was a Church of God in Christ. These are remnant, obviously, Black faith communities, and there are no Black people in my community. There are 3% of the population in Redwood City is Black, and that is down from double digits in the mid-1990s. No one is talking about the ravages of displacement that has claimed our community. And again, to be an allyship means to be speaking that truth and then to be actioning on it. If we do not speak truth at the outset, nothing can happen. So we need to expect people to be speaking that truth actively.
It seems it's hard to be unified with power if the numbers aren't there.
That is a very interesting point, and a very difficult one. And I don't think that you're wrong in that assessment. However, I do think that it goes beyond political pragmatism, which is essentially, I think, what we're talking about when we're talking about numbers. I agree that we in San Mateo County do not have the numbers. We as a Black community do not have the numbers. But when we talk about progressive values, we're talking about protecting those on the margins, those who are at risk. And our community is one of those communities that needs to be upheld as a community at risk.
I would like to add that I totally agree with what Michael says, and I also totally agree with what Kaleema says about that the budget really reflects values. And I remember vividly that day that you speak of, and it was interesting. I won't go there right now, but I think also in terms of talking about the numbers, number one, there are others in the San Mateo community that share a lot of the same concerns that may not be Black. And those are the types, of people and organizations that we need to be collaborating with. I've found a number of white people, in particular in San Mateo County, who really are concerned about what's going on in the Black community and in other marginalized communities in San Mateo, and are committed to trying to make a change. So I don't think that we have to have the numbers to make some type of movement. We need the collaboration, but also I think it goes back to, what did this nation say that it was about? And I think, and that's what Martin Luther King did. He took it back to, this is what we said that we were about. We're about freedom, liberty. And so we need to
Justice
take it
for
back for all. And we need to continue to take people back to that statement, because even those founding fathers that wrote it, some of them had slaves. So the bottom line is that they may not have meant it, but they wrote it. So it's there. You wrote the check. Now it's time for us to cash that check. And so as long as we stand in that gap of truth, and we stand in that gap of calling this nation, calling this community to doing what they say, calling the politicians, like Michael was saying, we put you in office, calling them back. Now, this is what you said, and this is what we're demanding. And the other thing that I wanted to make sure that we talk about is that when we talk about truth, again, is not letting the fad of certain phrases and all of that take hold, in having a lot of people who really are not looking at the same goals that we are, but they'll take the, it's a fad. For example, right now, DEI is a fad, equity is a fad. Everybody's talking about equity. I see people that are, committed to equity, and I watch what they do, and they're anything but equitable. So we have to speak truth to power, to call out what they're talking about when they're talking about equity for those who are underserved, when they're talking about equity for the Black community. Equity, what you're talking about is not equity for me and for the Black community. So we need to take back a lot of these, the phrases and the movements that they have. Some of them have just take it over, and they have basically,
Co-opted?
Culturally appropriate.
Co-opted. That's the word I was looking for. Co-opted. Thank you. And take it back and call them out, and call them to doing what the politicians, this nation said they were going to do.
We have one more question.
Can I piggyback on that too? Because I want to say, to Reverend Owen's point, that a lot of people will say these things about equity, et cetera, and then hold up the possibility of an all-white, all-male board of supervisors. So, when we're talking about being progressive, when we're talking about true equity, when we're talking about what we need to do to uplift our communities, we also need to be in positions of power and in the room and part of those conversations, and not just an afterthought of, okay, we have the plan, let's run it by a few people of color to get some stamps on it and then push it through.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Kalima, because I think that that's the other piece. We have to have a seat at the table. And if you can get one person of color on every single commission in this county, it will change the flavor and the tenor of that commission, because then you've got a voice that wasn't at the table before.
Reverend Bussey, I would simply add, just because the person is a person of color doesn't mean that that voice is representative of what your goals are, Michael's goals might be, Kalima's goals might be. It has to be the person of color who is aware of what the issues are and what the goals are.
You're absolutely right. And that was going to be the rest of what I was going to say, is that if you have partnerships, if you have allies that are of one mind or of a united mind with you, then you can put those people up. San Mateo has 2% African American. There just aren't very many folks that are African American, but there are people in the Latino community that understand our plight because they're living our plight right now. And so there are people in the Pacific Islander community that are living our plight right now. So it doesn't always have to be somebody Black. It would be nice if it was somebody Black, but it needs to be somebody that has the same lived experience and that's fighting for the same values. That's the thing that's the most important. And I think if we can work to get those folks onto commissions and the Board of Supervisors and the other areas where decisions are made, it would help tremendously.
There is a question left in the chat. Is there a policy platform for local Black priorities that we should be aware of? Are there local key organizations or coalitions that we should look to for the priorities that hold a unity platform?
Yeah, there is actually. I appreciate the question. There is actually a coalition of Black elected leaders that meets every now and then, and we discuss issues that are related to the Black community and just San Mateo County in general. And so that is a forum. It's not necessarily a public forum, but it is a forum that is used to kind of create allyship and coalition build among Black leaders in the county. So there is that, our hope, I think, as a smaller organization is to become even more formalized, to be able to, essentially have public forums where folks can come and share ideas. It's still a young organization. And, we are in need of resources, as all organizations are, but it is a forum that does exist.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say that we've got representation from the oldest civil rights organization in the United States in the San Mateo NAACP. So we have been around for just shy of 100 years in San Mateo County. So I would like to, we're a small branch compared to some of our sister branches throughout the nation, but we're here. I appreciate the fact that we were approached regarding this Juneteenth celebration for our input. That was really a great, that was a wonderful step that the Board of Supervisors took, and I really appreciate it. But I would be remiss to say that there have been a number of things that have happened in this county with the NAACP being present, with elected officials knowing that we were here. And since I've been president, we've been very, very visible, and we've got a website. I've been out in the community. Number of our people have been out in the community. We're not hard to find. And yet we have not been approached. We were not talked to. We were not asked what our priorities are, what our opinions are. How did we feel about 310 tasers being bought to, I guess, continue to tase people of color in the community. We were not approached.
Did you expect someone to approach you? Or,
yes, I would. Sure, why not?
Or if we know an issue is coming up, should we approach others first?
Well, in this particular case, what Kalima was talking about, that $1 million, almost $1 million was hidden in the budget. That action had already been taken by the time it was made public. And I personally took off from work, and I was on a Zoom because it was during COVID. And I spoke a number of times about that situation throughout the day. And when the vote came, there was not even the recognition that any of us existed. So I would say, hey, yes, there should have been an approaching of the community leaders of color that you know about, especially if you're going to hide things in budgets and you're not going to be public about what you're doing. I would expect to be approached.
That seems to be par for the course. Isn't that the way we've usually been treated? When the highway goes through our neighborhoods, where we ask first, what do we want? when we've been segregated, or when we've been left out, when we haven't had a seat at the table, isn't that the way the past is gone?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But Yeah, we're not saying that it hasn't, but what we are saying is, if the question is, is there, policy, or is there a way that the elected officials and the leaders of the county in particular, or the municipalities, the school boards, or whatever, what should they be doing? Well, if you really are, especially if you're running around here with equities in your various statements and all that, then, put some feet on what you're saying. Approach your communities of color, approach your Black elected officials, approach those groups that exist. They're there. And if you're really about equity, if you're really serious about leveling the playing field, then, if we don't already have a formal seat at the table, then you still should be approaching us and asking us what our opinions and what our wants and what our goals are. Otherwise, cut the crap, cut the equity out, and just be honest about what you really are doing.
So just to quickly jump in, Reverend Owens is exactly right. There are whole teams within city and county organizations that are responsible to reach out to organizations like the NAACP. It is a huge problem that they're not being asked for their input on certain matters, and that absolutely needs to be addressed. I know we have some county staff on the line. Just hope you take note about this, commentary, and that it's shared with, the supervisors and the various county staff.
Michael, I'm sure they are taking note, and I'd like to thank all of you for what you've shared. It's a conversation that could be going on, but we need to stop it. And but thank you all for your input. It was very insightful. And I'd like to turn our conversation, the discussion, back over to Bray or Shireen, or from our county representative.
Thank you so much, Henrietta, and thank you so much to all of our panelists for such a wonderful conversation. This does conclude our 4-part webinar series. So I will go ahead and share my screen to have some further learning, additional resources on the screen for a few moments that you all can, if you'd like to screenshot this, or again, the webinar recording will be available online at the county's Juneteenth webpage, and you can go ahead and reference this again. So thank you again to Henrietta, as well as all of our panelists and previous panelists from the last 3 webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Stay well.
Thank you.
Be blessed. Bye-bye.
Thank you.